Welcome to my garage. This is where I store my seeds. I've got a garden shed out there, but what happens is it tends to get really damp. So I like to store them in a nice dry environment. And in some cases, I actually store some of my seeds in the fridge, and I'll explain how I do that a little later on. If you go on your journey of growing your own food, at some point you're going to want to know more about seeds, and you're going to want to start growing your plants from seed. You could keep going to the local nursery and purchasing seedlings. However, you don't have the same variety available to you, and it does start to get more expensive. So you want to actually purchase some seeds. Now you can do that online. There's some great ones. I've listed them below. You could also just go to your local nursery or the big green shed and purchase them there. You want to look out for what they refer to as open pollinated seeds. Now, an open pollinated seed will retain roughly between 99–98% of the same genetic makeup as its parent. Now, the reason you want that as a backyard grower is that you can save seeds year after year, and you will be able to grow the same variety because it retains the same genetic makeup. Every so often, you'll get that 1%, and that's where you get a new variety. But ideally, when you're saving your seeds, and you always want to save from the best fruit or the best performing plant, you're going to be creating a seed that is suited to your own microclimate. Now, heirloom is just a marketing term that refers to an old variety. So heirloom is old. In the case of seeds, an heirloom seed is older than 50 years. Now, all of those are open pollinated, and that's one way to know that what you're purchasing is actually open pollinated. Now, a hybrid seed is created by pollinating two different types. So you will get two different types of plants. They cross-pollinate to produce an offspring. Now, you'll see that on either the seed packet or in the name, where they refer to the seed with F1 or F2 in the name, and that's either first generation or second generation cross. Now, these are perfect in some situations for you to grow. However, you're not able to save those seeds. So what happens in that case quite often is that they revert back to one of those two parents' traits. But the term organic is used often in the garden nursery space because anything derived from carbon can be considered organic. Doesn't mean that it's certified. So if you want a certified product, if you really want an organic product, you're going to have to look for a symbol that's printed on the packet itself. A couple things to store your seeds. I like to use these old supplement containers. They're great because they come with a little bit of silica in there. I keep those, helps to get them rid of the moisture. Quite often I put them in a container with some rice. So see that? With some rice, and I'll chuck them in the fridge. And that puts them into a state of hibernation. Now, ideally you want to use seeds within the first couple seasons of harvesting them. Seeds will still last a long time. What happens over a period of time is that the germination rate tends to drop. So if they're not stored correctly, you will find that when you go to plant them next, that they don't germinate, or that the germination rate drops dramatically. Now, most of the seeds that you purchase from the large manufacturers actually are imported, and they come from growers overseas. Now, a lot of the regulation now requires that those seeds get fumigated and that they have a fungicide applied. Now, what a fungicide looks like is it's either pink in colour or it's a silvery grey, and that is applied to the seed itself, so that way it doesn't rot. Now, in that case, it's not going to be an organic product. I still use them occasionally because I've purchased them, but it's something to note next time you open up a packet and you see it. I'm a bit of a lazy gardener, and there's certain varieties that lend themselves to being planted directly into the veggie patch. So when someone refers to direct sowing, that means you're going to plant it directly where the plant is going to grow. You could propagate them in seedling trays, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But there's certain varieties that lend themselves to being planted in the location they're going to grow. One, because of transplant shock, and it's just as easy. So things like peas, broad beans, beans, bush beans, carrots, even lettuce in some cases, beetroot. These are varieties that are better off sowing directly into the garden bed. Then things such as tomatoes, capsicum, chilies, they're better off being propagated into a seedling tray and to actually grow on. Okay, fun stuff now. Now we get to go out in the veggie patch. So follow me. Now I'm going to plant some beans because I have them. All right. And I've also got some lettuce that I've just bought this from Bunnings, okay? A couple of tools I like to use for the job. It's just either, this is a little hand hoe, but I'm just going to rake here. Okay. Remove any weeds that I might have had. The general rule of thumb when sowing seeds is that you want to plant them to a depth twice their diameter. So if a seed is that big, needs to sit underneath the soil by the same amount. So that's roughly about 1 centimetre. So I'm going to want to create a little hole to plant that into that is roughly 2 centimetres deep. So in that case, things like beans are really easy. I just grab my finger and I create a little hole that's 2 centimetres deep, pop the seed in and backfill. The other thing you could do with certain varieties is you could, what they call scarification, and you could soak them. It tends to soften and it activates the seed. It triggers it to let it know that it needs to start growing. I also like to water in with some Epsom salts. The Epsom salts contains magnesium, which helps with the germination of the plant as well. In the case of the lettuce, for example, I'm just going to create a little bit of a drill, like so, and then I'm going to sprinkle the seeds in, and then I just use my 2 fingers and I backfill in, and again I will water in with water. Could put some seaweed solution in there. Now in some cases, with particular varieties of vegetables, you're going to want to actually propagate them in seedling trays prior to transplanting them in your veggie patch. And the reason being is quite often, particularly in colder climates, you can start your crops early, so that way you can start them in winter, for example, inside, out of the weather, to get them ready for spring. And just certain varieties actually lend themselves to being grown on and started out in a seedling tray before you transplant them into the veggie patch. Things such as tomatoes and capsicum are prime examples. Now, I typically like to use these recycled seedling punnets. Got so many of them from purchasing seedlings, as well as these 100 ml pots from Herbs. Now you could purchase them brand new, or you could just actually ask your local nursery. They throw out so many of these things, they end up getting recycled, but you could ask them and they will give them to you. Just make sure you give them a really good wash in some soapy water before you use them. You could also use other household items such as margarine containers or yogurt containers to actually plant into. Just make sure you've got a hole in the base of it, so then that way it actually drains out. Now in terms of what you put in there, I like to use a seed raising mix that you can purchase from your local nursery. The reason being is that the majority of the way that I grow food is that I directly plant in the veggie patch. I don't propagate an awful lot. Therefore, it's worth my while just buying a seed raising mix. You could make it yourself. I've got a recipe in the notes on how to do that. The other product that I use and I really like is a worm castings. If you don't make it yourself, you can purchase it like this, but I make it through my worm farm and I use that often to propagate my seeds. I think it works really well, and it's a great way of also closing the loop again because I'm making it on site. So all you do is you fill these up with some seed raising mix. Just clean it up, bit of a mess. Seed raising mix. pencil works well. Could use a chopstick. Just make an inch. I just top dress with some worm castings, and then I just label it. I put the name of the variety and the date that I've sown it, just for a reference, because quite often you forget otherwise. So then I'll just place that into my polystyrene box. I'll then end up putting a sheet of glass over that, and I'll place that in somewhere out of the way. And you'll know when they're ready is when the roots start to actually appear at the base of the seedling tray.